teen told bikers a secret, a single lie that unleashed an unstoppable wave of roaring chaos on her stepfather. This is the story of a clever girl, an arrogant man, and the day he finally broke. If you're new here, subscribe and comment your location. Now let's begin. "He hates the sound of your engines the most," the girl said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the boisterous clamor of the burger joint like a shard of glass. She was a wisp of a thing, perched on the edge of the vinyl booth, clutching a soda she hadn't touched. Her eyes, wide and the color of a stormy sea, were fixed on Mark "Grinder" McGrath, the de facto leader of the Iron Squirrels MC. Grinder leaned back, his leather cut creaking. He was a mountain of a man, his beard shot through with silver, his knuckles a roadmap of old disagreements. He'd seen a lot of things, but a teenage girl deliberately seeking out a biker gang at their sacred Thursday burger night was a new one. "Lots of people do, sweetheart. It's part of the charm." "No, you don't understand," she insisted, leaning forward, a tremor in her hands that wasn't entirely an act. "My stepdad, David, he used to be an activist. Ran a whole campaign in his old town to get bikers banned from the main strip. He called your kind, well, he called you overcompensating man-children on loud, pathetic toys." She let the phrase hang in the air, a perfectly crafted piece of poison. "He sits in his home office, which faces the street, and he laughs. He says the only thing your bikes are good for is masking the sound of his. She trailed off, looking down as if ashamed. Grinder's amicable expression hardened. Next to him, Paul Bones Jones, the club's sergeant-at-arms, slowly put his beer down. "Masking the sound of what, kid?" Bones asked, his voice a low rumble. Chloe looked up, a single perfect tear tracing a path down her cheek. "His victories, when he's, with his friends, while my mom's at work." She swallowed hard, selling the lie with every fiber of her being. "He says the roar of your Harleys is the perfect soundtrack for his conquests." A profound silence fell over their corner of the diner. The lie was a masterstroke. It wasn't just an insult to their bikes, it was an insult to their very code, their twisted but deeply held sense of honor regarding women and loyalty. David wasn't just a hater. He was a cheating, loud-mouthed blowhead who used their passion as a backdrop for his sleaze. Grinder's eyes narrowed. He studied Chloe, the slight tremble, the genuine-looking distress. He saw the strategic genius hidden beneath the fragile exterior, but he mistook it for desperation. And the Iron Squirrels, for all their rough edges, had a soft spot for the desperate. "What's your name, kid?" Grinder asked, his voice softer now. "Chloe," she whispered. "And where does this David live, Chloe?" A slow internal smile bloomed within Chloe. The first pawn had been moved. The game was afoot. David was holding court in the living room when the first low rumble began. It started as a distant thunder, a vibration that made the windows in his pristine, beige-themed house hum. He was in the middle of a monologue about the stupidity of his junior associates, a glass of single malt scotch swirling in his hand. And I told him, "If you can't parse the basic fundamentals of fiduciary responsibility, then you have no business." The rumble grew, coalescing into the distinct potato-potato-potato rhythm of a V-twin engine, then another, and another. David's jaw tightened. For God's sake, those Neanderthals. Chloe, curled on the sofa with a textbook, hid her smile behind the pages. Her mother, Elena, looked up from her crossword puzzle. "It's just a few motorcycles, David, they'll pass." But they didn't pass. The sound swelled, becoming a deafening, earth-shaking roar as a procession of a dozen gleaming Harley-Davidsons rolled slowly, deliberately past their quiet suburban home. The riders, a wall of denim and leather, didn't look over. They didn't gesture, they just rode, a slow-moving avalanche of noise that made the pictures on the walls rattle and David's face turn a satisfying shade of magenta. As the last bike faded into the distance, a ringing silence descended. David stormed to the window and yanked the curtain back. "Idiots! Absolute brain-dead idiots!" He rounded on Chloe and Elena. "You see? This is what I'm talking about. No regard for peace and quiet, for common decency." The next day it happened again. At exactly 5:17 p.m., just as David was settling into his favorite armchair to watch the financial news, the roar returned. This time the procession was even slower. One of the bikers, a giant with a silver-streaked beard, Grinder, seemed to turn his head just a fraction, his eyes scanning the house before facing forward again. "They're doing it on purpose," David seethed, spilling his scotch on the white rug. Elena tried to soothe him. "It's a coincidence, honey. It's probably just their route home." But Chloe knew better. She had been the architect of this beautiful, noisy chaos. That night, she found the Iron Squirrel's semi-public social media page, a carefully curated mix of charity rides and burger night photos. She created a fake account and sent a private message. "Your presence was felt. The target was agitated. He was on an important call. It was glorious." A few minutes later, a reply came from an account named Grinder MC. It was just a single winking emoji. The following day was Saturday. David, determined to reclaim his weekend, decided to mow the lawn. He was pushing the mower, sweating and muttering about the humidity when the familiar rumble began. This time, the bikers didn't just ride past. They stopped, right in front of his house. They killed their engines in near unison, creating a sudden, shocking silence broken only by the sputter of David's lawnmower. Grinder dismounted, his boots crunching on the gravel of the driveway. He walked up to the mailbox, not looking at David, and affixed a small vinyl sticker to its side. It was the Iron Squirrel's logo, a furious-looking squirrel riding a lightning bolt. He gave David a slow, deliberate look, a ghost of a smile on his face, then got back on his bike. The engines roared to life and they rode off, leaving David standing frozen in his perfectly manicured lawn, a vein throbbing in his temple. He stormed over to the mailbox and ripped the sticker off, shredding it with trembling fingers. "Did you see that?" he yelled towards the house. "That was a threat, a direct threat." From her bedroom window, Chloe watched, her heart soaring. Phase 2 was complete. The psychological operation was escalating beautifully. The following Thursday, Chloe felt a thrill of danger as she slipped back into the burger joint. This was a risk, but a calculated one. She needed to see their faces to gauge their commitment. Grinder saw her the moment she walked in. He nodded to an empty space in their booth. Bones scooted over, his expression unreadable. "Chloe," Grinder said, sliding a menu towards her. "Burgers on us." "I can't stay long," she said, her voice still pitched with feigned nervousness. "How's things at home?" Bones asked, his eyes sharp. "He's unraveling," Chloe confessed, and this part at least was true. "He accused the mailman of being in cahoots with you. He bought a decibel meter and stands at the window with it, charting the noise levels." She allowed a real, genuine laugh to bubble up. "It's the most exercise he's gotten in years." A chuckle went around the table. These hardened men, some grandfathers, some with checkered pasts, were being utterly charmed by this teenage girl's war of attrition. "The sticker was a nice touch," she added, looking at Grinder. He gave a slow, lazy smile. "We're full of nice touches." His eyes held hers for a moment too long, and Chloe felt an unexpected electric jolt. There was a dangerous charisma to him, a raw alpha energy that was the polar opposite of David's petty bluster. It was a charged moment, a flicker of something potent and adult in the midst of her childish scheme. She looked away, her cheeks flushing. "The thing is," she said, steering the conversation back to safer ground, "he always takes a nap on Sundays from 2 to 4 p.m. He says it's essential for his cognitive peak performance. Grinder's smile widened. Is that so? A man needs his rest. Bones nodded, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. A Sunday serenade, I like it. The following Sunday at 2:01 p.m., the Iron Squirrels MC executed their first creative request. It wasn't just a ride past, it was a performance. They rode down the street in a perfectly staggered formation, and then, on some unseen signal, they began revving their engines in a rhythmic, syncopated pattern. Rev, 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 rev. It was loud, obnoxious, and utterly beautifully disruptive. David came stumbling out of the house in his silk pajamas, his hair standing on end, screaming into the quiet suburban afternoon. The bikers, without breaking formation, gave him a synchronized, gloved wave before rumbling away. Chloe, watching from behind a tree at the end of the street, felt a surge of pure, unadulterated power. She pulled out her phone. The fake account had a new message. The 2 p.m. performance was maestro level. He was in his pajamas, priceless. The reply was almost immediate. We aim to please. Any other sensitive times? The game had evolved. The bikers were no longer unwitting pawns. They were willing, enthusiastic co-conspirators. They'd started a group chat called Operation Pajama Jam, and they took immense pride in their escalating campaigns of annoyance. They discovered David worked from home on Wednesdays for deep focused strategy sessions. So at 11 a.m. sharp, they would park across the street, not riding, but just sitting on their bikes, talking and laughing loudly for exactly 15 minutes before leaving. They learned he had a weekly video call with his boss in London. Grinder himself would ride up to the house on his custom Softail, its pipes particularly thunderous, and pretend to have trouble with his bike, revving the engine repeatedly right outside David's office window. David was spiraling. He installed security cameras. He called the police so often that the local precinct started sending a single bored-looking community service officer who would just shrug and say, "It's a public street, sir." He started drinking more, his rants becoming more unhinged, more personal. He began accusing Elena of not supporting him, of secretly enjoying his humiliation. "Why won't you back me up on this?" he snarled at her one evening after a particularly disruptive lunchtime ride-by that had interrupted his power nap. "Because you're being ridiculous, David," Elena finally snapped, a crack appearing in her usual placid demeanor. "They're motorcycles, they drive down the street. You're acting like it's a military siege." "It is a siege," he roared, slamming his hand on the kitchen table. Chloe flinched, a genuine reaction this time. "They're targeting me. Can't you see that? That little bitch is probably behind it." He glared at Chloe, who met his gaze with a perfectly crafted look of wide-eyed innocence. "Don't you dare talk to her like that," Elena said, her voice low and dangerous. It was the first time Chloe had ever heard her mother stand up to him. The sight sent a different kind of thrill through her. This wasn't just about annoying David anymore. It was about waking up her mother. The charged chemistry between Chloe and Grinder's world also continued to simmer. She'd started staying longer at burger nights, sitting in the booth, listening to their stories. They weren't the monsters David painted them to be. They were mechanics, veterans, a guy who owned a dog grooming salon. And Grinder, she learned, was a widower. His wife had died of cancer 5 years earlier, and the club had been his rock. He spoke about her with a reverence that made Chloe's heart ache. One night, as she was leaving, he walked her out to her bike, a modest little scooter she'd saved up for. "You're playing a dangerous game, kid," he said, his voice low. The neon sign of the burger joint reflected in his eyes. "I know," she said, her own voice quiet, "but it's working. He's getting worse. Your mom, is she okay?" The concern in his voice, so genuine, so at odds with his appearance, disarmed her completely. "She's then waking up, thanks to you. It's not us, it's you. You've got guts, Chloe, and a hell of a strategic mind." He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. The touch was brief, paternal almost, but the intensity in his gaze was not. It was a look that acknowledged her not as a child, but as a formidable, attractive woman. The air crackled between them, a silent acknowledgement of the line they were both dancing around. You just be careful. Angry men like him, they can snap. The warning sent a shiver down her spine, a mix of fear and excitement. The climax came on a Tuesday. David had been silent all morning, a brooding, terrifying quiet. He'd been passed over for a promotion, a fact he blamed entirely on the constant psychological torture disrupting his workflow. The bikers, tipped off by Chloe, had planned their grand finale, a mock birthday ride for David, complete with a banner that read, "Happy birthday, David. Love your favorite man-children," and a coordinated horn-honking parade scheduled for 6 p.m., right as he typically mixed his first scotch. At 5:55 p.m., the air was thick with tension. David was pacing in the living room, a glass already in his hand. Elena was in the kitchen, deliberately making noise with the pots and pans. Chloe waited by the window, her phone in her hand, ready to record the glorious moment. But David stopped pacing. He walked over to the fireplace and picked up a heavy brass poker. His eyes were hollow, his face a mask of cold fury. "That's it," he whispered. "No more." "David, what are you doing?" Elena asked, her voice trembling. "I'm ending this once and for all." He marched towards the front door just as the first glorious roar of the motorcycles filled the air. Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The moment of victory. David yanked the door open, the brass poker held like a club. The lead bike was Grinder's. He saw David, saw the weapon, and killed his engine. The bikes behind him did the same, one by one, until a profound, eerie silence fell. The entire Iron Squirrel's MC was there, dismounting, forming a loose, menacing semicircle on the sidewalk. They didn't say a word. They just stared at David. Their collective presence a wall of silent, implacable force. David stood on his porch, the poker in his hand, looking suddenly pathetic and small. He was just a man, a bloated, angry man facing down a pack of wolves he had foolishly provoked. The bluster drained from his face, replaced by raw, undiluted fear. He saw the cold assessment in Grinder's eyes, the promise of unspoken violence in Bones's crossed arms. The standoff seemed to last an eternity. The entire neighborhood was watching from behind curtains. Then David's shoulders slumped. The poker clattered onto the porch steps. He didn't look at the bikers. He looked at Elena, who was standing in the doorway, her hand over her mouth. He looked at Chloe, whose expression was no longer one of innocence, but of cold, hard victory. He understood everything in that moment. The lies, the manipulation, the brilliant, devastating campaign waged against him. He had been outmaneuvered by a teenage girl and a biker gang. His voice, when it finally came, was a broken, ragged thing, stripped of all its arrogance. It was a whisper of surrender that carried in the dead quiet. "Please," he begged, his eyes fixed on Grinder. "Please, just stop. I'll do anything. Just make it stop." Grinder didn't even glance at Chloe for confirmation. He held David's defeated gaze for a long, long moment. Then he gave a single, slow nod. He turned, swung a leg over his bike, and kicked it to life. The rest of the squirrels followed suit. Without another look back, they rode off, their engines this time a quiet, respectful purr, leaving David standing alone and broken on his porch. The next day, David was quiet. He packed a bag. He told Elena he was going to a hotel for a while, that he needed to get his head straight. The house felt different without him. Lighter, the air easier to breathe. A week later, Chloe went to the burger joint one last time. She walked up to Grinder's booth and slid a folded piece of paper across the table. "What's this?" he asked, unfolding it. It was a drawing, a surprisingly good one, of the Iron Squirrel's logo, but instead of a lightning bolt, The squirrel was riding a pencil like a jousting lance. Underneath it said, "Thank you." "It's not much," she said, suddenly shy. "But thank you for everything." Grinder looked from the drawing to her face. The charged energy was still there, but it was softer now, tempered with a mutual respect. "He's gone? For now. My mom, she's talking to a lawyer." He nodded. "You did good, kid. You protected your mom. That's what matters." He paused. "The offer for a burger still stands, anytime." Chloe smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I might take you up on that." She turned to leave, the weight of the last few months finally lifting from her shoulders. She had started a war with a lie, but she'd won it with the truth of her own strength, and with the help of the most unlikely army of chaos a girl could ever ask for. And as she walked out into the night, the distant, friendly rumble of a single motorcycle followed her all the way home, a guardian echo in the dark. The silence in the house after David left was a physical presence, thick and sweet as honey. For the first few days, Chloe and her mother, Elena, moved through the rooms like ghosts, afraid to speak too loudly, as if the sound of their happiness might shatter the fragile peace. The absence of David's bluster, his criticizing commentary, the heavy slam of his office door was a symphony of quiet. Elena started to change. It was subtle at first. She stopped flinching at sudden noises. She began playing music in the kitchen while she cooked. Not the bland, inoffensive classical David preferred, but the vibrant, soulful pop ballads she'd loved in her youth. One evening, Chloe came home to find her mother dancing with a wooden spoon in front of the stove, her laughter a sound so long forgotten it brought tears to Chloe's eyes. "Mom," Chloe said, leaning against the doorframe. Elena spun around, her face flushed not with anxiety but with joy. "Oh, Chloe, I was just—" The sauce needed stirring. She smiled a little sheepishly, but the light in her eyes was unwavering. "It's quiet, isn't it?" "It's perfect," Chloe whispered. A week after the porchside surrender, a thick, legal-looking envelope arrived. Elena opened it with steady hands, her jaw set in a line of grim determination Chloe had never seen before. It was the preliminary divorce papers. Elena signed them without a moment's hesitation, her pen scratching decisively against the paper. "He called this morning," Elena said, placing the signed documents back in the envelope. "He wanted to talk sense into me. Said we'd been the victims of a coordinated harassment campaign." She let out a short, dry laugh. "I told him the only campaign was the one he'd been waging against our peace of mind for years, and that it was over." Chloe felt a surge of pride so fierce it stole her breath. Her mother wasn't just waking up, she was rising like a phoenix from the ashes of David's ego. But the world outside their newfound sanctuary was still turning. The following Thursday, a familiar restlessness pulled at Chloe. The mission was over. David was gone. Yet the thought of the burger joint, the smell of frying onions and exhaust, the low rumble of familiar voices called to her. She needed to see it through. She needed to face Grinder without the mask of the desperate, scheming girl. She found him in the usual booth, but he was alone, nursing a coffee and staring out the window. He looked older without his club around him, the lines on his face more pronounced, the silver in his beard more prominent. He saw her, and a slow, genuine smile softened his features. "Chloe," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "Was wondering if I'd see you again." "I brought you this," she said, sliding into the booth and handing him a white paper bag. Inside were 2 perfect golden apple turnovers from the bakery her mom loved. A peace offering, or a thank you offering, I'm not sure which. Grinder chuckled, a warm, rich sound. "You don't owe me anything, kid." He took a bite of a turnover, closing his eyes in appreciation. "Damn, that's good. My mom favorite," Chloe said. She signed the papers today. Grinder's eyes met hers, sharp and knowing. Good for her, and for you. He took a sip of his coffee. How are you holding up? It's a big thing, orchestrating the downfall of a tyrant, even a petty one. The question, so direct and seeing right through her bravado, unraveled something in her. The tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed, tears of fear, of relief, of the sheer emotional exhaustion of the past few months, welled up. She looked down, quickly wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I'm okay. It's just a lot. She expected him to be awkward, to retreat from the display of emotion. Instead, Grinder's large, calloused hand covered hers on the Formica table. It was warm, rough, and utterly reassuring. The charge was there again, but it was different now, less dangerous, more comforting. A current of shared experience and unspoken understanding. Listen to me, he said, his voice low and serious. What you did took guts and brains. You saw a problem and you found a creative solution, a damn effective one. You protected your family, never be ashamed of that. He held her gaze, and in that moment, Chloe didn't feel like a clever kid anymore. She felt seen. Truly seen by a man who understood the cost of strength. The air between them hummed with a potent mix of mentorship and something else, something that made her heart beat a little faster. The guys miss you, you know, he said, finally releasing her hand and leaning back, breaking the intensity. Bones tried to suggest we find another project. I told him to can it. We're not in the business of terrorizing suburbanites as a habit. You were a special case. She laughed, the sound watery but real. I'm honored. You should be. He finished his coffee. You got a ride home? My scooter's out back. I'll follow you. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a quiet insistence on ensuring her safety that sent another warm shiver through her. It's what we do. We look after our own. The phrase hung in the air. Our own. Was she? The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. He rode behind her all the way to her street, the deep, familiar purr of his Harley a protective escort. He didn't turn onto her cul-de-sac, just gave her a single sharp wave before peeling off at the intersection. It was respectful. It was mindful of the very gossip David had always feared. Chloe watched his taillight disappear into the night, a strange, lonely feeling settling in her chest. The next few weeks fell into a new rhythm. Chloe threw herself into school. Elena started seeing a therapist and reconnected with old friends. The house became a home, filled with laughter and the scent of Elena's experimental, sometimes disastrous cooking. And Chloe found herself drawn back to the burger joint again and again. It became her secret sanctuary. She'd do her homework in a corner booth, and Grinder would often wander over, sliding a plate of fries her way and asking about her classes. He was surprisingly well-read, a voracious consumer of history books and military strategy. Their conversations evolved from the tactical takedown of David to debates about the Peloponnesian War, or the engineering marvel of the Harley-Davidson knucklehead engine. One evening, Bones ambled over, a grin on his grizzled face. So, the general's back, he said, nodding at Chloe's textbook on the American Revolution. Planning your next campaign? Maybe, Chloe shot back, smiling. I'm thinking of running for student body president. I've got a pretty powerful ground game. Bones let out a bark of laughter that turned heads. I like this one, Grinder. She's got teeth. Grinder just smiled, a quiet, proprietary pride in his eyes that made Chloe's stomach flutter. It was after one of these study sessions, about a month after David's departure, that things shifted again. It was late, and the diner was empty except for a lone trucker at the counter. Chloe was packing her bag when Grinder approached. Walk you to your scooter? He asked. The night was cool, the parking lot illuminated by a single flickering sodium light. They walked in a comfortable silence, the crunch of their footsteps on the gravel the only sound. "You know," Grinder said, stopping beside her scooter. You coming around? It's been good. For me." He shoved his hands in his pockets, a strangely vulnerable gesture for such a large man. "After my wife, Sarah, passed, this club, these guys, they were my anchor. But it's easy to get stuck, to just be Grinder, the guy on the bike. You make me remember there's other parts, the part that likes talking about history, the part that worries if a kid gets home safe." Chloe's heart was pounding. The air was charged, crackling with an admission that was far more intimate than any physical touch could be. "You're not just the guy on the bike," she said softly, looking up at him. The flickering light carved shadows on his face, making him look both fierce and gentle. "You're Mark." The use of his real name seemed to startle him. His eyes darkened, searching hers. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was electric, sending a jolt of pure, undiluted awareness through her entire body. It was no longer a paternal comfort. It was the touch of a man captivated by a woman. "Chloe," he murmured, his voice a low rasp, "you're 17. "I'll be 18 in 3 months, she whispered, the words leaving her lips before she could stop them. It was a confession, a plea, and a promise all at once. A war raged in his eyes, desire raw and potent battled with a deep, ingrained honor. He was a man who lived by a code, and everything in that code screamed that this was a line he could not, should not cross. He let his hand drop, his fist clenching at his side. He took a deliberate step back, putting a crucial few inches of cool night air between them. 3 months is a long time, he said, his voice thick with a restraint that was more thrilling than any kiss could have been. And you have a whole life ahead of you. College, a career. A world that isn't diners and bike grease. Maybe that's not the world I want, she said, her own voice trembling with a courage she didn't know she possessed. A sad, knowing smile touched his lips. You say that now, and God, part of me hopes you mean it. He shook his head. I'm not a good man, Chloe. I've done things. My life is complicated. You deserve sunlight, not shadows. He turned and walked towards his bike, his shoulders set with a finality that broke her heart. He kicked the engine to life, the roar shattering the intimate quiet of the night. He didn't look back as he rode away, leaving her standing alone in the parking lot, the ghost of his touch still burning on her skin. She didn't go to the burger joint the next week, or the week after. The absence was a physical ache. She threw herself into college applications, into planning a future that suddenly felt gray and meaningless. Her mother noticed the change. You've been quiet, sweetie, Elena said one evening, sitting beside her on the sofa. Is it David? The divorce is final now. He's gone for good. It's not David, Chloe said, resting her head on her mother's shoulder. It's something else. Someone else. Elena was quiet for a moment, stroking her daughter's hair. Someone older? Someone who rides a very loud motorcycle, perhaps? Chloe sat up, shocked. How did you know? A mother knows, Chloe, and a woman who's just remembered what it's like to feel alive can recognize the signs in her daughter. Elena's expression was serious but not angry. He's a complicated man, Mark. I did some asking around after everything. He's respected. He's also dangerous. His world is not a safe one. I know, Chloe whispered. Do you? Elena took her hand. Love shouldn't feel like a war, Chloe. The battle with David is over. Don't enlist in another one straight away. The wisdom in her mother's words settled over her. She was right. This thing with Grinder was a product of a chaotic, high-stakes time. It was born from shared secrets and a victorious campaign. It wasn't real life. She resolved to move on, to be the girl who deserved sunlight. On the eve of her 18th birthday, a small, flat package arrived at the house. There was no return address. Inside, nestled in simple brown paper, was a book. It was a first edition copy of Sun Tzu's The Art of War. Tucked into the front cover was a handwritten note on a simple piece of notebook paper. Chloe, happy birthday. A strategist should always have the original text. You taught an old dog that some wars are worth fighting and that the best generals come in unexpected packages. Don't ever lose your fire. The world is full of sunlight. Go conquer it. Yours, Mark. There was no plea, no declaration of love. It was a benediction, a passing of the torch. It was the most perfect, heartbreaking gift she had ever received. She cried that night for the what if and the could have been. She cried for the intensity of a connection that was as real as it was impossible. The next morning, on her 18th birthday, she woke up with a new resolve. She dressed, had breakfast with her beaming mother, and then walked to her scooter. She didn't turn towards the library or the mall. She turned towards the industrial part of town, towards a specific garage she'd only ever heard about in stories. The Iron Squirrel's clubhouse was a converted auto body shop surrounded by a chain-link fence. Several bikes were parked outside. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she killed the scooter's engine. This was it, her declaration. She walked to the gate, took a deep breath, and pushed it open. The main bay was a cavernous space smelling of oil, gasoline, and coffee. A few of the guys were working on a disassembled engine. Bones was at a grinder, sparks flying, and Grinder was at a desk in the corner, his back to her, studying a parts catalog. The grinding stopped. The talking ceased. Every eye in the place turned to her. Grinder turned slowly in his chair. He saw her, and his face was a mask of surprise, confusion, and a flicker of something she dared to hope was the same desperate longing she felt. Bones broke the silence. Well, I'll be damned. The general's come to inspect the troops. Chloe ignored him, her eyes locked on Mark. She walked across the concrete floor until she was standing in front of his desk. I got your book, she said, her voice clear and steady in the quiet room. He just watched her, his expression unreadable. You told me I deserved sunlight, she continued, her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. But you were wrong. I don't want to just sit in the sun, it's boring. I want the storm. I want the shadows and the complexity. I want a life that means something. She took a final bold step forward, placing her hands on his desk and leaning in. And I'm not a kid anymore, Mark. I'm 18. Today. The air in the garage was so still she could hear the drip of a faucet somewhere. The eyes of his entire club were on them. This was his world, and she had just marched into the heart of it, unarmed and unafraid. A slow, devastating smile spread across Grinder's face. It wasn't the smile of the strategic ally or the concerned protector. It was the smile of a man who had been waiting. A man finally seeing the one thing he wanted but refused to take, being offered to him freely. He stood up, his chair scraping against the concrete. He was so much taller than her, his presence overwhelming. He didn't touch her. He just looked down at her, his gaze sweeping over her face as if committing it to memory. Yeah, he said, his voice low and for her alone, though the entire garage was listening. I can see that. He reached out then, not to pull her into an embrace, but to gently take her hand. His thumb stroked the back of her knuckles, a simple, possessive gesture that held the promise of everything. Bones, Grinder said without taking his eyes off Chloe. Put the coffee on. It looks like the generals decided to enlist after all. And as a chorus of chuckles and good-natured grumbles rose around them, Chloe knew the battle was finally truly over. The war for her future, however, had just begun, and she was exactly where she was meant to be. The garage held its breath. The drip, drip, drip from a leaky faucet was the only sound, a metronome counting the seconds of the standoff. Chloe stood her ground, her hands still flat on the scarred wooden desk, her gaze locked with Mark's. The air crackled, not with the threat of violence, but with the terrifying, exhilarating energy of a line being irrevocably crossed. Mark's smile was a slow, seismic event. It transformed his entire face, carving away the years of hard living and grief, revealing the man he might have been before life had hardened him. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated surrender. "Yeah," he repeated, his voice a low rumble that vibrated deep in her bones. "I can see that." His hand, when it enveloped hers, was everything she'd imagined and more. It was calloused and strong, a map of manual labor and miles on the handlebars. Yet his touch was impossibly gentle. His thumb stroked the back of her knuckles, a simple, possessive gesture that felt more intimate than any kiss. It was a promise, a claiming. "Bones," Grinder said, his eyes never leaving Chloe's. "Put the coffee on. It looks like the generals decided to enlist after all." The spell was broken. A wave of relieved laughter and good-natured catcalls echoed through the garage. Bones shook his head, a massive grin splitting his grizzled face as he ambled towards the ancient coffee percolator in the corner. "About damn time," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Mark finally moved from behind the desk. He didn't pull her into a dramatic embrace, not here, not in front of his men. That would come later, in private. Instead, he kept hold of her hand, his grip firm and sure, and led her towards a quieter corner of the garage, away from the main workbay. They settled on a worn-out leather couch that smelled faintly of gasoline and old cigarettes, a relic that had seen decades of club meetings and late-night strategy sessions. He poured her a mug of the thick tar-black coffee Bones handed him. "You sure about this, Chloe?" he asked, his voice low for her ears only. The bravado was gone, replaced by a raw, vulnerable honesty. "This life, it's not burgers and parades. There's baggage, there's danger, there are people who see the cut and not the man wearing it." Chloe took a sip of the bitter coffee, feeling its heat spread through her. It was awful and perfect. "I'm not interested in the man without the cut, Mark," she said, her voice steady. "I'm interested in all of it. The man who reads history books, the leader who mobilized a whole MC for a stranger, the one who walked away because he thought it was the right thing to do. The baggage is part of the package, and as for danger..." She allowed a small, fierce smile. "I think I've proven I can handle myself." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not the desperate girl from the diner, but the formidable young woman she had become. He saw the steel in her spine, the fire in her stormy eyes, the brilliant strategic mind that had captivated him from the start. The last of his resistance crumbled. "Okay," he whispered, the word a vow. "Okay." The next few months were a whirlwind of discovery. Chloe learned the rhythms of the clubhouse, the unspoken codes, the deep, familial bonds that held the iron squirrels together. She wasn't just Grinder's girl. She earned her own respect. She helped Bones with the club's books, her sharp mind spotting inefficiencies he'd missed for years. She listened to the old-timers' stories, her presence a fresh audience for tales they'd told 100 times. Her relationship with Mark was a slow, burning fuse. It was charged and intense, but he was determined to do it right. Their first real kiss didn't happen in the shadowy clubhouse, but under the open sky on a cliff overlooking the city, the lights twinkling below them like a carpet of fallen stars. It was a kiss that held months of pent-up longing, a kiss that tasted of coffee, freedom, and a future she had fought for. It wasn't always easy. There were sideways glances from people in town, The raised eyebrow from a college interviewer when she mentioned her boyfriend was the president of a motorcycle club. There were nights Mark was called away for club business, his face grim, and she would wait, her heart in her throat, until she heard the familiar rumble of his bike returning. She learned to live with a low hum of anxiety, but she never regretted her choice. The sunlight her mother had spoken of was there, but it was the light that breaks through storm clouds, dramatic, beautiful, and hard-won. One evening, about a year after she'd marched into the garage, they were at the burger joint, the whole club crammed into their usual booths. The noise was deafening, a symphony of laughter, arguing, and the clatter of plates. Chloe was wedged between Mark and Bones, debating the strategic merits of D-Day with a fervor that made the old biker chuckle. Mark watched her, his arm draped casually over the back of the booth behind her, his fingers lightly tracing the line of her shoulder. She was glowing, fully in her element, her laughter ringing out above the din. She caught him looking and smiled, a private, soft smile just for him. In that moment, surrounded by the chaotic, loyal family she had chosen, with the man she loved looking at her as if she had hung the moon, Chloe knew this was her empire. Not built on fear or domination, but on respect, on chosen loyalty, on the unshakable bonds forged in the fires of a shared, ridiculous, and glorious war. It was messy, it was loud, and it was absolutely perfect. She leaned into Mark's side, the rough leather of his cut familiar against her cheek. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head, his breath warm in her hair. "Happy," he murmured, his voice a vibration she felt deep in her soul. Chloe looked around the table at the faces of these unlikely men who had become her army, her friends, her family. She thought of her mother, happier and stronger than she'd ever been. She thought of the silent, powerful house that was now a home. She tilted her face up to his, her stormy eyes clear and certain. "I'm home," she said, and she was. Thank you for watching. Have you ever wanted to see a bully get their ultimate comeuppance? Let us know where you're watching from in the comments below, and hit subscribe for more stories of epic revenge and justice served.